Welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah.
Ever find yourself puzzled by some really baffling human behaviors? Things like intense self-sabotage, maybe chronic internal conflict, or even, phobias that seem to come out of nowhere.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fascinating stuff.
It really is. And it's amazing how our earliest experiences, often from the time before we could even talk, really sculpt who we become.
The very foundation.
Exactly. So today, we're diving deep into some complex psychological insights. We're drawing from a really profound source text. It's called Narcissistic Transference.pdf.
A very rich source.
It is. And our mission, essentially, is to unpack this powerful idea, narcissistic transference. It's often misunderstood, I think.
Definitely.
We want to explore how it impacts personality development and, maybe more importantly, how therapists use this understanding to approach healing some pretty deep wounds.
It changes the whole approach sometimes.
Get ready for some surprising facts and maybe a few aha moments.
Yeah.
Because grasping this concept, it offers a really fresh look at human connection and, well, the defenses we all build.
It really does illuminate things.
Okay, so let's start maybe at the beginning. Modern psychoanalysis. It's really undergone quite a shift, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. A significant transformation. Early on, the focus was maybe more on things like phobias, compulsions, things Freud initially worked with.
Right. But then analysts realized they needed to dig deeper, go beyond those traditional Freudian ideas.
Exactly. They started exploring genetic factors, constitutional makeup, but especially those critical early environmental influences.
To understand what it means to, well, like the source says, hide behind the narcissistic defense, what does that actually look like?
Yeah, what is that defense? It's a complex idea for sure, but tackling it opened up completely new therapeutic pathways. It was pretty revolutionary.
Revolutionary how?
Well, think about it. Traditionally, the belief was, okay, a patient needs a sufficiently mature ego, a solid sense of self before therapy could really even start.
Right, like a baseline stability.
Precisely. But modern analysts, they challenged that. They bravely abandoned that view.
Which sounds risky.
It might seem so, but it opened the door to treating what they call preverbal disorders.
Preverbal. So before language.
Exactly. Conditions rooted in psychological fixations, like getting stuck, emotionally speaking, in that first year or two of life, long before we have words for our experiences.
Wow. So reaching people previously thought untreatable.
That's the core of it. It allowed them to engage with difficulties stemming from that foundational period.
And historically, this was a gap, even for Freud.
Yeah, it's interesting. Freud's early work, obviously groundbreaking, was most successful with, like we said, hysterias, phobias, compulsions. But here's something quite striking from our source. When it came to these more severe narcissistic disorders, Freud himself apparently felt unable to modify the interpretive approach.
Really? He couldn't adapt?
It seems so. The text even suggests he never understood his own pre-Oedipal wishes. His own earliest, deeply buried desires might have been a blind spot.
Wow. That's quite an admission, if true.
It highlights a major limitation in early therapy. It made it incredibly difficult for him to effectively treat patients whose struggles began in those pre-language years. People with severe paranoia, schizophrenia, or what they used to call oral personalities, fixated on those very early nurturing needs.
So narcissism presented this unique, profound challenge right from the start.
It really did.
Okay, so given that history, what is this narcissistic defense then? How does the source actually define it?
It defines it in a really specific and kind of arresting way as the patient's repetitive self-attacks.
Self-attacks, how does that work?
Well, think about it. Normally, if you're frustrated, angry, the healthy outlet is putting feelings into words, right? Communicating.
Sure, talk it out.
But what if that's blocked? If that aggression gets sort of bottled up inside, it turns inward. It leads to this intense, often unconscious attack on the self. And that right there is the heart of the narcissistic defense.
Okay, turning anger inward instead of outward.
Exactly. And it connects directly back to those really early developmental roots. It forms from interpersonal patterns that created pre-ego, pre-feeling patterns of discharge.
Pre-ego, pre-feeling.
Oh.
So before a solid sense of self or even distinct emotions.
That's the idea. Coping mechanisms developed before all that was fully formed. So when someone in therapy regresses to that primal level,
which can happen.
Oh, yes, their communication reverts to what the source calls the timeless world of infancy. It lacks that normal sense of time and space. Their reactions become unpredictable.
Because they're in that early state.
Right. And crucially, in this state, the person often can't distinguish between inner and outer reality.
The lines blur completely.
They blur. Intense internal feelings can feel like external threats. There's this famous quote from a patient, really captures it. "I want to kill you to get you out of my head."
Wow.
Right.
Vivid. Shows how powerful those internal states can be.
Incredibly powerful.
Okay, so we see how these defenses form early on. How do they actually play out in therapy? You mentioned regression.
Right. So when a patient, feeling safe enough, starts to regress to those first years of life in therapy, tapping into those primal states, they don't form the typical kind of bond. It's not what's called object transference, where you project feelings from past figures onto the therapist as a separate person.
Okay, not like seeing the therapist as your mother or father.
Sort of, but it's different. Instead, they develop a narcissistic transference.
Narcissistic transference, okay.
And this leads to a big question analysts grapple with. Do we want a narcissistic transference to develop?
Which sounds completely backward, right? Why would you want that difficult state?
It does sound counterintuitive, but the answer, surprisingly, is we do.
You do want it. Why?
Because that seemingly challenging, deeply regressed state is actually seen as profoundly curative.
How?
In that state, the patient might experience the analyst not as separate, but as being like him or part of him, or even feeling like the analyst may not exist for him as a distinct individual at all.
Like emerging.
Almost. The source calls it a syntonic feeling of oneness. It's this deep sense of attunement, being completely in sync, almost indistinguishable.
Okay.
And that feeling of oneness is curative. It allows the patient to re-experience a state of complete connection and safety, whereas feeling alone, for them, is just a protective shield against overwhelming feelings.
So the connection itself is the healing part.
In essence, yes. And because, as the source notes, traces of narcissism remain in everyone, the analyst's goal is actually to create an environment that will facilitate this narcissistic transference.
Encourage it.
To encourage it so they can then work through the patient's narcissistic aggression within that safe, connected space.
Yeah.
How much a patient tries to ward us off and avoid emotional contact tells the analyst a lot about how deeply fixated they are in these early patterns.
Wow. Okay, that sounds incredibly tricky for the analyst to manage.
Yeah.
But very delicate balance.
It's extremely delicate.
So how do they create that safe space, that ego-syntonic atmosphere you mentioned, where the patient feels the analyst is non-threatening, almost like them?
Well, modern analysts are incredibly careful. They consciously avoid exposing the patient to any uninvited communication or interpretation.
Meaning they don't just jump in with advice or insights.
Exactly. No sudden confrontations or interpretations the patient isn't ready for. This allows the patient to feel safe enough to, well, say and feel things without taking action.
Without acting out.
Right, which paradoxically is what allows real emotional contact to increase over time.
But it must be hard for the analyst. The source mentions it's difficult to remain objective.
Oh, absolutely. Imagine a patient expressing this transference by, say, attacking the analyst's perceived faults, really perceptively pinpointing the sensitive spots.
Right.
Or when a patient talks about self-destruction, describes awful things they've done to themselves. It naturally stirs up strong feelings in the analyst. Things like hopelessness, isolation, or rage.
I can imagine. Takes immense control.
It takes immense self-awareness and rigorous training. And here's a crucial point. The easier response, the more instinctive one for the analyst, might be to become supportive or gratifying. You know, reassure them, trying to fix it, make them feel better immediately.
Seems like the kind thing to do.
It seems like it, but our source says this approach is actually detrimental. It leads the patient to attack himself even more and increases the analyst's feeling of hopelessness.
Wow. So being supportive backfires.
In this specific context, yes. The key isn't to simply react supportively to the self-attacks. It's for the analyst to gently help redirect that inner aggression.
Oh.
By allowing the patient to re-experience emotional reactions that echo past developmental blocks, past points where maturation stalled. Doing this frees them up to finally mature beyond those very early fixations.
Okay, that clarifies the therapist's role significantly. It's about facilitating a deeper process, not just surface support.
Exactly. It's complex work.
These concepts are pretty abstract. Maybe a case study would help. The source mentions someone named Barbara.
Yes, Barbara's case is fascinating. It really brings these ideas to life. She apparently lived most of her life using what is called a manic defense.
A manic defense, like high energy, always busy.
Sort of. It's about keeping difficult feelings down through intense activity, maybe a heightened mood, constant outward focus. But eventually, for Barbara, this evolved. It became, as the source puts it, a thin disguise for her narcissism in phobic symptomatology.
So her phobias were actually covering up deeper narcissistic issues.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
Her initial way of coping, that manic defense, was about externalizing her badness.
Pushing it outward.
Yeah, projecting her destructive impulses onto the environment rather than feeling them inside. This let her maintain a, relatively comfortable internal state, at least for a while.
So her career, fighting for causes, that was part of this defense.
Very likely. Her years as an executive fighting for women's rights, crusading against injustice, these were likely attempts to stabilize, to channel that internal energy outwards, and keep inner conflicts contained.
Okay, so what changed? Why did the phobias appear?
The shift seemed to happen when those external efforts weren't enough anymore. They no longer satisfied her underlying, perhaps unconscious, desire for revenge against the original parent figures.
Revenge, wow.
Deep-seated anger, likely from early experiences. When fighting external battles didn't quell that internal rage, the phobias emerged.
And how did that manifest?
The source says she started distorting events into black and white issues, no gray areas. This intensified a split between the bad self and the good object. People were either all good or all bad.
All or nothing thinking.
Exactly. And her specific phobias, agoraphobia, claustrophobia, fear of tight clothes, elevators, they served a purpose.
What purpose?
Unconsciously, they helped limit her social contacts. And crucially, they protected her from a desire to act on her destructive impulses.
So the phobias kept her safe from her own aggression.
In a way, yes, but at a huge cost. The cost was suspended animation, like being emotionally paralyzed and being caught in a double bind.
Trapped between wanting freedom and fearing her own impulses.
Precisely. Her internal conflict was stark. She consciously wanted freedom, but her intense fears screamed the opposite.
How so?
Now, take her agoraphobia. The unconscious message was something like, I do not want the freedom that I consciously crave. I want to be tied to people, but I cannot tolerate the feelings that closeness brings up.
Wow. So a fear of intimacy,
A
essentially.
very profound fear. And her claustrophobia. That kicked in specifically when relationships felt like they were getting overstimulating, too close, too overwhelming.
So push-pull. Wanting closeness, but fearing it intensely.
Exactly. It's a classic dilemma in these cases.
And what about her lifestyle? You mentioned she seemed independent, maybe disdainful of marriage, had casual partners. How did that fit in?
Yes. That's really revealing. The source suggests her male friends offered intimate relationships without intimacy.
Connection without
I
vulnerability.
got it. And the freedom to back off when closeness threatened. There were partial relationships, essentially. Connection on her terms.
Controlled connection.
Perfectly put. And unconsciously, the source notes, everyone, male and female, functioned as mother figures for her.
Everyone was mom.
In terms of her basic relating pattern, yes. It highlights her pre-Oedipal way of connecting, stuck in that very early infant-mother dynamic.
And the phobias played into this.
They did. Her phobias actually provided her with controlled mothering. It's like the infant's desire to have its mother on call to provide services, but enacted through phobic limitations.
So the phobias forced others to care for her in a specific, limited way.
That's one interpretation. But the deepest message, according to the source, was about infantile longing and the wish to destroy or incorporate the object, meaning the mother figure, as it was perceived during Barbara's first year of life.
Destroy or incorporate. That sounds intense. Primal.
It is. It speaks to the intensity of those unmet early needs and the rage associated with them.
So how would a therapist even approach something like this? You wouldn't just try to get rid of the phobias.
Absolutely not. A modern analyst would not try to dismantle that defense prematurely. Because doing it before the underlying aggression could be discharged sufficiently in therapy, well, it could trigger a more severe aggression. Take away the coping mechanism too soon, and the patient is overwhelmed.
So you let the narcissistic transference develop first.
Yes. Treatment focuses on allowing that transference to unfold. Within that, the analyst can gradually offer what's called a faithful twin image.
A twin image, like a mirror.
Exactly. Reflecting the patient's internal state without judgment, allowing that raw, early self to emerge safely and be seen, perhaps for the first time.
Okay. And what was the core emotion driving Barbara's phobias ultimately.
The source is clear. Rage, not sexuality, was to be avoided.
Rage was the big danger.
Yes. In the transference, as she felt safer, she revealed this powerful desire to annihilate anyone who aroused in her longings for emotional closeness.
Annihilate them. Why?
Because those very longings made her feel weak, inadequate, and helpless. The vulnerability felt annihilating to her.
So closeness triggered intense fear and rage.
Precisely. Her back and forth between claustrophobia and agoraphobia, that reflected a symbiotic struggle, a push-pull between the fear of losing the needed images, the few controlled connections she had, and the powerful wish to destroy the unsatisfying image, the people who couldn't meet those impossible infantile needs.
It all comes back to the early mothering experience.
Ultimately, the source suggests the key factor in her symptoms was the way he visualizes the early maternal environment and his feelings about the quality of mothering he received. That early template shaped everything.
That's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
Barbara's case really illustrates the theory. So bringing it back out, what does this all mean for us, the listener? How does understanding narcissistic defenses and transference help us?
Well, it's crucial to remember that even in these very early preverbal stages, the psyche has a powerful drive for connection, a strong libidinal attachment to others,
A need for closeness.
a deep instinctive desire for the warmth and closeness that others can provide. Think of an infant's basic need to be held, soothed, talked to. It's those fundamental longings that get reactivated in the narcissistic transference.
The need for connection resurfaces.
Yes. And here's a paradox. Those very longings, that need for connection, also help the patient protect important people in their lives.
No.
They act as a buffer against the murderously enraged impulses that can bubble up from deep frustration. The need for the person overrides the impulse to destroy them, in a sense.
Okay. So the longing preserves the relationship, even if it's fraught.
In a way. And the ultimate goal of this kind of therapy, it isn't just symptom relief. It's training the patient to eventually seek gratification outside the analysis.
To find healthy connections in the real world.
Exactly. To develop a mature personality that can experience frustration and object hatred without the necessity of destroying either itself or the other person. Building resilience, integration.
That's a really powerful goal. So this framework helps us understand things that might just look like confusion or irrational behavior.
Precisely. It helps make sense of what might seem like garbled communications or confused states of mind, both in others and maybe even in ourselves sometimes.
Also,
It shows how people, when deeply frustrated and lacking healthier coping skills, might resort to these increasingly pathological retreats just to keep emotional tension bearable.
like attacking themselves.
Often, yes, attacking a part of themselves unconsciously to protect loved ones, because expressing that raw anger directly feels far too dangerous or threatening to the needed relationship.
So self-destruction as a protective measure, in a twisted way.
Exactly. Viewing these reactions not as just random or bad, but as organized responses, as attempts, however distorted, to cope, lets us see the flow of libidinal and aggressive energy stemming from those very first attempts to manage life's tensions.
It's a whole different way of looking at challenging behavior.
It's a profound shift in perspective, really, understanding the protective function behind the pathology.
We've really journeyed through quite an intricate world today. Narcissistic transference, early development, defenses. Seeing how those first experiences shape us in ways we might never expect. Like Barbara's phobias being a disguise.
The hidden layers.
It really makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
About the hidden forces driving our own behavior, our own relationships.
It certainly does. And maybe this raises a final question for you, the listener, to consider.
Okay.
Given how deeply these early experiences shape our protective patterns, maybe think about this. What subtle ways might our own unconscious defenses be playing out in our daily interactions? Perhaps quietly guiding us away from potential closeness or steering us clear of vulnerability.
How our patterns might be limiting us without us realizing.
Exactly. And if those patterns were originally formed to protect us when we were most vulnerable, how might we now, with more awareness, begin to choose new, perhaps more fulfilling ways of engaging with others and with ourselves?